Yes, very good. So, my voice is not a Stradivarius, but I really prefer to speak open voice like this than with the microphone. It's so confusing. Come closer if you don't hear me. I try to speak loud enough, but make me understand if it works. So, today there is a lecture. It seems so confrontative, smart things being told, and I actually hope it will be smart enough not to get bored. And Alexander Lonkwich asked me quite some time ago via Grazia to do a lecture this time about musical rhetoric, which is one of the main issues of ECMA. And I immediately felt, that's always a challenge, because we work with that, we go into it, and as far as I remember from my own first contact with rhetoric, it's also quite confusing getting plenty of Latin words, paf, and to understand the concept. That's my aim today. First of all, to make you understand the concept of musical rhetoric, maybe understand how and why did it appear in musical history, and then on an example going into understanding how far it is not something very theoretic, but very practical and very direct for our understanding of music. There is one question that we are constantly confronted with in our work, and it sometimes turns up quietly when we talk about music, and when we exchange ideas, rehearse or teach, which some of you will be already teaching or teaching one day, which is a challenge always to find words to what we do. And we try to describe what is this, what it is, what we do. And that's the question, what is music? No? And music has been many things throughout human history. And it existed for sure before we called it music. And it was mathematics, and it could be a love song, a tool of power, entertainment, prayer, dance music, seduction, overwhelming, utopia, incantation, trance, mysticism, philosophy, and much more. We have plenty of possibilities to connect music to our being. Music is so very difficult to define and limit to one thing. Like we can say, this is music. No? And yet, 18th century authors in Europe were fairly unanimous in their definition of music. They wrote, music is a language, and even more precisely, a language of feelings and emotions, an affect language. Sources on musical rhetoric and this linguistic reference can be found in literature from 1699 to 1788, and for sure something missing out. But I can show you a little collection of authors and their works in which the terms and the theory of musical rhetorics is mentioned. Whoever wants to have this, you can have it later. No problem. These are all treatises about music in general, which include musical rhetorics. So, music is a language. A language that is capable not only of expressing feelings, but also of triggering them directly at the listener. Musik als Klangrede. Music as sound speech, if we want to translate this. And quote the title of Nikolaus Harnoncourt's famous book, Musik als Klangrede. If we think of music as a language, if we compose it as a language and play it as a language, then we also want to be understood. We will then develop means and rules to be convincing and clear in our expression. And this desire, this attempt, has led to the development of a musical rhetoric basically in German-speaking culture. This is one of the things which, if somebody doesn't like musical rhetoric as a concept, you can say, yeah, there is something like that, but you only find it in German writings, to make it a bit less important. Fine, no? But there is something. So, there is a doctrine of creating and performing Klangrede, sound speech, and this is musical rhetoric. What is rhetoric in general? Rhetoric is the art of speaking. That is, the study of how to construct and deliver a speech, everything that goes into it, from finding arguments, dividing them into different sections, embellishing them with additional examples, throwing in distractions, jokes, various tricks of argumentation, right through to the actual presenting, which is also part of rhetorics. It is taught and covered in great detail in rhetoric. Its written roots go back to ancient Greece, via Aristoteles, the theory of persuasion, and Quintilian, who with his Institutio Oratoria probably wrote the most extensive and complete textbook on rhetoric in antiquity. It's 10 books. No? And it goes into the study plan of the first European universities and on to higher education also in our times. From a German perspective, which I have, and some of us also, however, it must be noted that in the 20th century, as a result of experiences during the Nazi era, rhetoric fell into such disrepute as a seemingly uncontrollable weapon of mass manipulation that it was banned from school curricula. Today, rhetoric is only taught and researched as a separate subject at one only single German university, which is Tübingen. So from one of the basic subjects of university education, all we have now in Germany is one only Lehrstuhl, one university doing it still. Rhetoric is therefore virtually invisible as a discipline in Germany today, and yet every speech by a politician, every sermon by a pastor, every lecture by a professor is an example of rhetoric. In fact, any verbal statement made by a person can be seen as rhetoric, even if the speaker has no training in rhetoric and is not even aware of its existence. Rhetoric is therefore, and I find this quite interesting, a discipline for something we do anyway. It is simply intended to help us do it more successfully. We do it anyway, and this is, if we think already a bit the analogy to music, also there it's very interesting. The above-mentioned mistrust of rhetoric is not new. Even in ancient Greece, there was the accusation that rhetoric itself could be unethical, namely when it was used to achieve something evil. No? If I want to convince you all of something wrong, and I manage because I'm a good speaker. This is could be unethic now to do it. This fundamental problem can be compared to the debate about the moral or immoral use of weapons. Aristoteles attempts to compensate for this defect as follows. He defines and hierarchizes. Do we have any native English speakers with us? No. Yes. He hierarchizes three powers of convincing. The ethos of the speaker, that is the credibility which is based on the speaker's general reputation. So you believe me maybe more because we know each other already and I was in a certain role already. No? The pathos the speaker is able to employ, that is, the emotional state he is able to create in himself and his listeners. And finally, and this is meant as the most important essential force, logos, the power of the arguments. By giving the greatest importance to the arguments, logos, moral doubts about rhetoric itself are also to be relativized. Because if my arguments are good, I can also seduce you to something. No? Then it's not so bad. Whatever our views on rhetoric may be today, and I think there are very different levels of how strong rhetoric is still alive in the culture, looking into different countries. It was an integral part of university education in medieval Europe. We find them in trivium, the three linguistic disciplines within the Septem Artes Liberalis. This was a system of disciplines developed in late antiquity that students had to learn as a core base for training later in law, medicine, or theology. So a basic education. Septem Artes Liberalis, I also wrote it down once. This to have a brief overview. Also because our discipline, music, can also be found here. So these are the 7 disciplines. In the trivium, we have grammar, dialectics, and rhetorics. That's all about language. Grammar meaning we learn how the language is working. We don't do mistakes in this. Dialectics, it's the art of arguing on two opposing opinions. And rhetorics is the art of convincing by speaking. By the way, the word trivium is the origin for the word trivial, because this is just the language. The higher education of the Septem Artis is in the quadrivium. This is all the mathematics. Arithmetics, the number. Geometry, the form, usually at this time still in 2 dimensions. Astronomy, geometry in 3 dimensions in the space. And music, 4 dimensions, mathematics in space and time. So it's really the understanding of why we can see music is part of mathematics. So to summarize a bit about this concept, this may be a little thing by the side. You can still study in American universities. When you go to the university and you don't know yet what you want to do, you can study liberal arts, it's called. This is coming from Septem Artes Liberalis. It's including usually basic courses in communication and debate skills and all this. Huh? Nothing. So, To summarize once shortly, rhetoric is the general study of how to convince people with the help of a speech. It includes all the steps involved from conceiving the speech, finding and arranging effective arguments, and formulating them linguistically, to advise on memorizing the speech and presenting it. So from composition to performance, everything we need. If we now look at the individual areas of these various steps, we might expect a teaching method to provide a kind of guide for the meaningful conception and invention of our arguments, then a list of the various formal elements, and we expect assistance with embellishments, namely a kind of catalogue of specific tricks, formulas, figures, etc. In fact, there is exactly such a classification. And at this point, we can elegantly transition from language to music without delving further into linguistic rhetoric for the time being. This is because we find exactly the same classification in music. Language and music are therefore very similar, at least at this point in history. How did they become so closely related? So closely that musical rhetoric emerged as a parallel discipline to rhetoric. After all, music is still classified as a mathematical discipline in the septem artis, as we have seen. No? There was this, and now it comes together so close. Vocal music is, of course, the connecting link between language and music. It is the key to our musical syntactic understanding, to the human scale in music, like the measurement of possibilities of us, singability, for instance, to the birth of European musical notation, to the formation of poetic structures such as periodic melody, and certainly also to the invention of musical rhetorical figures. Singing was not only intended to emphasize language, it was also considered one of the most affecting learning techniques for reliably memorizing texts. We are all familiar with this effect from songs we know well. We would struggle to repeat the words, but when we sing, they just come. No question. So you may, how was the third strophe? Sing the first two and then you know it. No? Both purposes, ritual emphasis and reliable memory, are combined as the core of religious liturgies. That the priest had to learn such an amount of words, and they were learning it singing. That was making it safe. And singing was also more beautiful, but the singing was still a lot of time of memorizing, so in this context we had the invention of writing it down, and so we get our notation. This is all very, very close together. We can therefore understand why language and music are so closely related, and why it was obvious that the doctrine of musical rhetoric could develop in parallel with rhetoric. Now, we take a closer look at this teaching system in musical rhetoric. For the sake of clarity, because like always, there are so many different schemas and things used and so on, I will refer today mainly on one single source, which is a very nice one also. It's Johann Matthison's composition manual from 1739, Der vollkommene Kapellmeister, the perfect Kapellmeister, the perfect composer, player, conductor, whatever. Mattison is also the one who uses the term Klangrede, sound speech, as a synonym for a piece of music. Whenever he says, this piece of music, it just says this Klangrede, ba 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 ba. Can be an aria, but can also be an instrumental piece. A very brief overview of the year 1739 for musicians. Johann Sebastian Bach is 64 years old. His son Carl Philipp is 25 and has just entered the service as a clavicordist of the Prussian Crown Prince Frederick, later King Frederick der Große, Friedrich der Große. Telemann is 58 and Haydn 7 years old. I like this, having a bit an idea when does this happen. Like other theorists of this time, Mattheson uses existing Latin terms from general ancient rhetoric. They essentially concern 3 parts. I will try to present this as clear as possible, having an overview, because it will help to avoid misunderstandings and make it, I hope, clearer than when I was first in touch. I was completely lost. We will see. Firstly, there are 4 steps involved in creating a piece of music. It's basically for composition. These 4 steps are called inventio, finding or inventing the arguments, namely the musical ideas. Dispositio, the structuring of the musical speech. That is really the form building. No? Elaboratio, after you have put the form, you work it out. So the elaboration of the individual parts. And the last step is the decoratio, the embellishment and decoration. We can really understand this is for composers. No? Secondly, and this is a subordination of the dispositio, the different parts. First, exordium, the beginning, the opening. That was when I said, hello, now we will speak about something. Narratio, the actual presentation of the essential musical idea. Propositio, the deepening of the idea through further arguments. Confutatio, the confusion, the presentation of counter-arguments. We can understand that this is, if I want to convince you to now make war against Carthago, huh? I will also say, yes, of course, we can have this or this problem. And then still try to convince you. So not neglecting what could be against is always part of a speech. Then the confirmatio, the confirmation of the essential ideas which have been presented in the beginning. And the peroratio, the conclusion. It's sometimes also appearing as conclusio. So then it's more in our usual word understanding. This is the subordination of dispositio. No? Thirdly, there is a large collection of figures, some of which are used for elaboration, but mainly for embellishment, decoratio. So they take part in elaboratio, in working through the music, but then also in decoratio. So it's also a subordination, and now we get in the difficulty of the amount. There are about 150 figures, which are named in different treatises, and which sometimes are quite the same than this one, and some of them can include another one. So it's not a material you can easily just make a certain order and then feel you have an overview. Yeah? I give you now just some examples from all those, and I will not too much be on figures today, because I feel like this is always the point where we get lost in rhetorics. So these, I name the most well-known, exclamatio, a call, no? It's usually a step up. Some say it's a quart up, bam, ba, but it can also be a sixth, no? Or other steps. It's always like, listen to me. Gradatio, which is an augmentation going up, sometimes also called climax. Patopoeia, it's a figure which is including notes which are not in the harmony, usually with augmented or diminished intervals, which is patopoeia, meaning creating pain in Old Greek. Interrogatio, which is a question figure. We will see some in the examples. Dubitatio, which is everything which makes us doubt. Anabasis, it's an upgoing line. Katabasis, a downgoing line. Noema, a homophone section in a polyphone piece. Aposiopsesis, it's a general pause. Passus duriusculus, we all know the passus as a lament figure, etc., etc. I remember I got as a gift, I wanted to bring it, but I forgot. Minna brought me from America. They have been in a place where they reconstructed the Shakespeare theater in America. They just made a replica of this theater, and they performed Shakespeare there. And there was a box with cards with rhetorical figures, not on music, the language figures. And I was thinking it's great, we can start to teach like just showing the cards during playing. However, one could fill easily several lectures with a discussion on the figures. In a way, they seem to be the key to a confident handling of musical rhetoric. I think this is our reflex as performers, because we are so interested in them as they are so directly linked to expression. No? They make us think, that's what it means, and then we have a kind of direct access. But this is very good, and they also help us not to build up big misunderstandings. They can make us understand more clear what the music says. Anyway, it's just like the last part of rhetoric in music, no? And we should understand where they are. However, since their classification has always been based on the fact that they should be able to subjectively trigger the emotions and effects, and here we understand the figure is first there as a musical idea, and then becoming a figure because it's used so often. Now, this is, I think, very important. Not somebody is inventing a musical figure, but a composer is doing something which is amazingly clear in expression. It is becoming a typical way of doing this expression, and then the theorists of musical rhetoric see it so often, and they think this is worth, we call it a figure, and we give it a name, and the names are taken from the language in comparison. If whoever wants to go into this, it's super interesting, and you get lost. No? To see all this, what is this in language, and so on. I think if we understand that the effect is meant to work subjectively without naming the figure, as the speech should be convincing without you saying or explaining how it is constructed, we understand how to put the names. No? We should take a closer look to these three main parts once more. Inventio, I go back to the first group. As a composer, I have to invent material, compile material for my piece of music. It can be a fugue subject, a melody for a sonata, trio sonata, or whatever. No? Plus suitable arguments. No? suitable arguments to a musical thought. What is that? It's more detailed thoughts. So I take the same and I will develop it a bit more profoundly. Or I take the same figure, but I put it in a different harmony, and it changes the first expression, but I bring it in context because it's the same figure. No? And of course, also, I will already think of contradictory thoughts. So we have contrasting motives. It can be inversions or completely different character. If my first thought is more in a line and lyrical, I do jumpy, articulated music as a contrast. This is like your opposite. No? Then I go to the dispositio, when I have my collection of material. I arrange this material in a suitable order and form, and we have seen above, this form follows a division into specific formal sections, which we also come back. That was the parts I told you before. Elaboratio, I connect the individual formal sections, work them out, and thus develop the final form of the piece of music. Decoratio, and here we see that we are in a period where ornaments had still their role, no? Which later they are kind of erased of our musical consciousness. I embellish the resulting musical work with figures, ornaments, diminutions, transitions, fermatas, etc. So far, this is as clear as it is challenging, but as performing musicians, we may not immediately feel the need to follow all these steps, much less label them with Latin terms. After all, we want to play an existing work, not compose one ourselves. And that's kind of true. This is composition stuff. What I find still very relevant to our playing, if we go into this understanding, is the differentiation of the musical material into essential ideas and ornamentation. What is really the thought? How is this thought developed? And what is more a lighter thing to make it elegant or connected, or to bring a context which otherwise would be difficult to connect. At its best, it teaches us not to overlook essential connections and to develop also a feeling for ornamentation and motives which should not be played as main notes. No? The second part, the subordination of the dispositio to the various parts of the sound speech, already gives us a better understanding of how the narrative syntax of music works. So we take a closer look, and I show you always this from Matteson's book. This is a facsimile, and it's, for non-Germans, very difficult to read. So das Exordium, this is about the first part, ist der Eingang und Anfang einer Melodie, worin zugleich der Zweck und die ganze Absicht derselben angezeigt werden muss. I will not read everything. Exordium is the opening section of a piece of music and can be a prelude to an aria, for instance. No? This is not the translation, it's an explanation about what it is. In a song, it will be the prelude of the instruments or an aria. In a concerto, it can be the orchestral part before the concerto enters. Sometimes we have pieces, there is no exordium. Sometimes it's just ba-bam, and then you start already with the subject. No, this is, it's not always there. In solo pieces, we do not usually expect much of exordium, because you speak in preludes, yes, but if we have a dance piece or something, we just start directly with a narratio. There is the first thought coming. Narratio ist gleichsam ein Bericht, eine Erzählung, wodurch die Meinung und Beschaffenheit des innenstehenden Vortrags angedeutet wird. So the narratio appears at the beginning of the main voice usually. It reports, that's what he says, Bericht, the main idea that is dealt with in the sound speech. Translated into more familiar terminology from musical form, it is usually identified as the main theme, no? Hauptthema. Die Proposition. This is where we deepen our first thought. No? We have a reflex from sonata form, we think, and then the second thema. No? But first we should deepen what we do, and a second thema can be also a deepening of the first thought. It deepens the idea of the narratio through arguments and more detailed considerations. In music, we usually see here a treatment of the main theme that is continued by means of variation. It can also be expanded by a second idea, something we have to add, which is already contrasting but still underlining what we said in the beginning. Die Confutatio ist eine Auflösung der Einwürfe. The confutatio contradicts the idea of the propositio, or the ideas of the propositio. We expect, as Matheson states, Bindungen. What he means with Bindungen is this typical counterpoint, this fourth type of Palestrina, with the syncopations. Bom, di, do, di, dom. These are Bindungen. I found it interesting he's naming it because we still find it very often after the double bar in classical pieces by Haydn and Mozart. This is the moment for old contrapunct. No? It has this character of reflecting and going deeper, and we get doubts. Fremdscheinende Fälle, he is saying, these are jumps outside the scale, so these are figures which will include saltus duriusculus, tritone, diminished, augmented intervals, and so on. All kinds of confusing and dissonant figures, expressing contradiction and doubt. Inversions or retrograde motion of previous motives are also typical devices of the confutatio. If you do with the same thing something opposite, no? We put everything in doubt. Die Confirmatio reconfirms the original thesis. Hier ist written eine künstliche Bekräftigung in Wortsinn, in the sense of, for the German speakers, künstlich meaning not artificial but artistic, still in this time. Matheson's text is somewhat difficult for our modern ears. Also, I still feel like I have to read some phrases several times, and then we have these different senses of words and so on. But we can understand. Interestingly, now he says also ordinary Reprisen, gewöhnliche Reprisen. This kind of reprise meaning repetition, not reprise of the sonata form. Yeah, so it's full of traps if we think of that. Lastly, peroratio serves as the end or conclusion. It almost always leads into the final cadence or repeats it once more for final confirmation. Confirmatio can already have a nice cadence back home, and you feel okay, and then it's coming once more to confirm. In pieces with accompaniment, it is a counterpart to the exordium, and we call also peroratio Nachspiel, everything which is played by the orchestra or the accompagnamento after the singer or after the solo instrument. Good. It will always be interesting for us to compare how the tools of formal analysis that we are familiar with correspond in a certain sense to the formal elements of rhetoric. Of course, I mean the sonata form. We are all familiar with this concept of exposition, development, reprise, Schluss, coda, and so on. And the origin we find here. We can really see that exposition is narratio propositio, development is the confutatio, the confusion, the reprise or recap is a confirmatio. But the model of the sonata form is invented much, much later, nearly at the middle of the 19th century, as a tool of analyzing. And it's part of the process in which the language understanding of music is getting weaker and disappearing. So far, so good, but we haven't talked about the figures yet much. I highlighted some, but I think we should do it all now in the context of music, because it's getting too much in the air of imagination. I will try to show all these parts in a short piece. I found one piece which is extremely nice in order. So an example which seems super convincing, I think. And of course, not every piece is so clearly following the setup. And it's a short piece of music. The first movement of Telemann's 7th Fantasia for solo violin in E flat major. Very suitable for us. Firstly, because it's very short and kind of easy to overview. And it really follows the sequence given to us by Matheson with surprising accuracy. Some of you may have played it. Just the first moving until Allegro starting. So, there will be no exordium. We just start directly with the narratio, which is this. So, what I did here is that I divided these few bars into a subject and a predicate. This is actually a terminology which is also used quite a lot in treatises. Heinrich Christoph Koch, for instance, just a few years later than Matheson, is writing a huge treatise on composition, and I find it extremely valuable for our syntax understanding of melodies. So we understand subject. This is what it is about. That is the beginning of the narratio. Then it is interrupted by a figure, which we can call interrogatio, a questioning figure. Really? And the predicate is saying what it makes me feel, the subject. Makes me a bit sad. Huh? We have this downgoing line. We could call this a typical catabasis, and we have lamento triplets there going down. Everything is quite on the lamento side. to support this connection, Telemann places this interrogatio. Sorry, I'm here in my manuscript. So our syntax of this roughly says, look, subject, this is what it is all about. It's a tender lament, no? Interrogatio, what do I feel when I hear it, or when I think it, or about this? Predicate, this is how I feel, melancholic. Now, after narratio, what do we expect? Propositio. So we expect a more detailed examination of this. Propositio 1. These parts are taken by the pauses. No? So, it is very brief, but very expressive and intense, because we have this huge jump from sol to la bemol. It is called as a figure saltus duriusculus, meaning a little bit harsh jump. It's just a description. No? And the ending figure, stepping out the diatonic with a diminished quart, with a patopoeia figure creating pain. So I say pa pa pi pom pi 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 pa dim pom pa dum. No? To deepen what I said before. And the next is, and you see it has the same upbeat, no? Which gives us a feeling of a list of reasons or of arguments. If you see the figure here, I wrote in German, sorry, Umkehrung, inversion. Our syntax will say, it can be like this, and I have the patopoeia, I feel sad or I feel pain. But also if it's like this, the other way around, it's going on like in moving figures, no? And a big interrogatio and a cadence. This is, if we connect it with the first, we see how this is developed. The interrogatio was much smaller, no? And we have this little list of two arguments. If it's this, it makes me if it's this, no? So now the next part is this, short as the Propositio 1. So I call this Confutatio 1. Now we can think, but why? Why not Propositio 3? No? Basically because of the upbeat is the inversion. It's all the opposite of the two upbeats before. We had twice pa 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 pom, pa ti ta ti, ta ti ta pom. We can think of a but in this upbeat. No? The inversion of the upbeat, another patopoeia, and an ending, which is an interrogatio. It's not a conclusion ending. Into the pause. No? So all this is very much doubting everything we heard before, or we played before. That's why I said the whole thing we feel like a dubitatio, like a doubt. Here you see how we mix everything, a figure and a figure in a figure and so on. That's why I say the figures, I still wrote them in a bit, no? But they are not so essentially telling us the bigger context. They just help us to find in the figures, in the section, in the smaller section, what to express. Confutatio 2, again we have first a shorter argument, then a longer. The same beginning as the first one. So we again have this impression of a little list. Here we can see how the material taken from the narratio R already steps. So I put the letter R here. No, it was. It's appearing again in between, and we have contrasting elements B, and the end is exactly what was the predicate of the first of the narratio, leading us. That's why I said Auflösung zur Confirmatio, back to Confirmatio. That is like the beginning. This is a repetition, but with a different interrogation, much stronger. And instead of the predicate of the beginning, we get a conclusion, telling us that's, you see, it was right. And at this point, we could also finish it, but Telemann is adding an extra peroratio. That's this. Just following directly. It's like a little repetition of the previous interrogatio. And another comparable conclusion, just an octave lower. And it it's like the Moral von der Geschichte. Now, the moral of the story was good. I want to go one step further with this connection of we imagine really there is a text and not just beautiful notes. So I will try to put this music into words. Yeah. It is problematic insofar as we cannot know what Telemann was thinking when he wrote the piece. So this is by no means about truth. Nevertheless, I think it is highly illuminating for us because we can suddenly see the syntax of the work very clearly. We can confidently forget the semantic clarity of the words I have chosen as soon as we understand the syntax. No? Then we forget it. We get something that works more or less like this. I have put it so you can read with me. Narratio. Whenever I see your picture, how do I feel? I feel sad. Propositio 1. This is because your picture awakens longing. Propositio 2. Even when I'm not looking at your picture, I put it together with the music afterwards. Huh? What do I feel? I'm longing. Confutatio 1. But could I do something about the pain? Confutatio 2. Could I seek happiness in forgetting? And yet I become sad when I see your picture. Why is that? Because I miss you. Conclusion. And now we do this. The peroratio, it's like a generalization of the confirmatio. Why do we miss? Because we love. Generally, no? I heard this. Oh. Now we try once more to follow it a bit more in detail. So, subject. Whenever I see your picture. Interrogatio. How do I feel? I feel sad. Yeah? You understand? It's not about the words per se, no? It's about the syntax. And this is because your picture awakens longing. Longing, why? Because of patopoeia. No? Awakens maybe because of this big salto. No? Now, even when I'm not looking, why even when I'm not looking? Because of the inversion. No? The opposite. Even then, I am moved. Why moved? Because of ti da da di da di da da ti da da di da di da da ti. By what? Big interrogatio. By longing. Just confirmation, conclusion. Now we have the different opening upbeat. But could I do anything about the pain of the patopoeia? Why is it a question? Because of the interrogatio at the end. Yeah? Could I seek? I chose seek because of this searching and switching between the elements. Happiness in forgetting, that was about the context of before. So we have this. Now we switch back to our confirmation. And yet I feel sad, which was the end of the predicate, when I see your picture. That was the subject. No? Why is that? Because I miss you. Generally, why do we miss? Because we love. Thank you. Again, I don't say this is the words of the piece. What I wanted to show you is that reading this music, which is from the core time of musical rhetoric, so it fits really very well also in the period. Using the knowledge about form, figures, and musical idioms makes it super rich in a very clear way of expressing. Of course, the musical thought, which is real and not my translation to it, which is absolutely not real and not the truth. I just try to use the same syntax. We could, instead of I look at your picture, to take something very different. It will always come to a comparable form of syntax, because this is very clearly composed. We get a feeling of being in a very close contact with these musical thoughts. I assume that also from your faces, but also because I know you from working generally and so on. Just wanted to show how understanding the general concept of this rhetoric and knowing that it was leading to a kind of a lead of for composers helps us to get in touch with the musical thoughts and their syntax. And then they are, of course, again, quite subjective, much more general, open to very different associations for everybody different. No? I find this very important to relativize again that it is not at all about this one example. But I deeply believe the syntax and the understanding of the motives, there is not much to doubt on. It is really based just on what we can understand by this art, how it was thought. And a musical thought, there is something I need to add, I didn't write about it. You know, the term musikalischer Gedanke comes up a bit later. and it's Hanslick in the middle and later 19th century, speaking about music as, how does he say, klingend bewegte Form, a sounding, moving form. And he is establishing the musical thought as a term to describe something which, in his opinion, has no meaning. It's just form. Sounding, moving form. And this is part of a process. It's one symptom of a time process which is concerning one part of our music history, which is going away from this complete connection of musical syntax. But there are also lines which are staying with it, namely Brahms. If we look into Brahms' music with an understanding of musical rhetoric, we cannot think that this is coincidence. He still wants to be understood. No? And this is leading us so close to the Second Vienna School that we can see how parts of this connection survive even into modern music, then maybe coming out as Théâtre musical and some other things. But in this time, a musical thought, if we name it like this, it's a subject meaning something. And this is, even though we don't have the precise word for it, it is possible to use it in a very refined syntax work on this thought. And that's what they did. In Matteson's book, I didn't prepare that, there is also an analysis he makes a bit, after he is showing all these rhetorical parts, he's analyzing an aria by Albinoni or something, an Italian master, maybe another one. I think it's Albinoni. And this is sophisticated analysis, incredible. Every little change of harmony, of step, is of highest importance. It's super interesting to see how profound the understanding was in this sense. So, I come back to this and I'm nearly done. Now it is important to understand that such a quasi-ideal form as we have seen here, it's gone, is not considered the norm. All parts within the sound speech can be mixed and used in free sequences. It's like with the speech. This is not a strict form like later the sonata form tries to describe. It can be a little part of confutatio followed by a conclusio and then again a confutatio. Maybe something like feeling like propositio coming back and another it's really very free possibilities. It's not a strict model. However, we always expect that the narratio will first be in the beginning, of course. It will first be confirmed by a propositio. We will never stay all alone. And that the peroratio will usually follow the confirmatio. If we understand what the confirmatio is, and there is a peroratio, and then nothing will interfere. But in between that, it can be very free, also in very short sections. So this was a very ideal element of just going through. We have also seen that the use and naming of figures is subject to great variability. One figure can contain other figures and so on. We don't have a static material, but rather a changeable, adaptable vocabulary that serves as a tool for composers to create a clear narrative. What do we do now with what we have heard? How do we understand the role of musical rhetoric in music in general? Like not just as a capriccio of a period in music history, no? Some strange flower in these years somewhere in this. Perhaps it is worth making one last comparison with language. When we speak, do we feel that we need rhetoric to communicate? No, not necessarily. You are all the time communicating. Sure, rhetoric will help us to be heard, but we can also say something important very quietly and calmly, simply and directly, when we are sure of the listener's attention. Music can do that too. And it can be very clear, without any big pathos. And if this excursion into musical rhetoric has helped us to hear the music speak, not as a metaphor, but as an actual language, then we have obtained knowledge from our observations. I mean, we can also touch the subject of improvisation. No? You can make a discussion with musical thoughts playing, and you will discover how close it is to a very subjective, direct, intuitive expression of gestures and feeling. And it is so human, no? And this language is based on this connection. We have obtained knowledge, namely that composers are conveying ideas to us and our audience, telling us something. They want to tell us something clear. The good composers, not every composer. There is literature which doesn't feel to have to do anything with it. But this and all our Vienna classical masters, they want Mendelssohn, of course. It comes to me because I did some Mendelssohn with you. Right. If we feel this speaking of the language, we can release the music easily from all these Latin terms and figures. No? And we can simply have joy in how diverse and how rich and how amusing and smart and moving this timeless language is. No? It can become your language. It does. It can more and more. No? And I think speaking out sometimes in a there can be a rehearsal, no? And you don't understand. You say, what do you mean? No? And now you can play it again, and try to play it understandable, and if it doesn't work, you can also try to speak it out, or find words for it, or say, but don't you understand? And then again try to play, or whatever. No? It is this conversation attitude to find it deeper and clearer, and then it always appears, it happens this, I understand you, and that is the best. That's what it is about, I think, very much, by all the good sound and intonation and so on, which is super important, of course. That's from my side. Do you want to ask questions or add something? We should have the time if there is some question coming up. Or you make a total confutatio, which makes it impossible for me to make a confirmatio again. If nothing is there and we are all too tired, then we close the box. If you are interested in the material, I can prepare it in a way so we send it to all of you. Would that be good? Yes. Good. Then, thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Good.